AP-80 Shooting Star, sleek and futuristic for its time, performs a high-speed pass. The sound is thin, a high-pitched whine. Cut to a different angle. A propeller-driven P-51 Mustang, its engine roaring, straining at full throttle. The footage shudders. We see a close-up of a wing, rivets rattling, the metal skin visibly warping and vibrating. In the autumn of 1946, humanity was at a crossroads. The Second World War had just concluded, a global inferno that had accelerated technology at a terrifying rate. We had split the atom. We had built jet engines that pushed aircraft to speeds barely imaginable just a decade earlier. The old barriers of geography, the oceans, the mountains, had been erased by air power. But one barrier remained. It was an invisible wall, a phantom menace that lived in the thin, cold air miles above the Earth. It was a point on a dial, a number on a gauge, Mach 1. The speed of sound. To the engineers, it was a problem of compressibility, a complex aerodynamic puzzle where the very air a plane flew through ceased to behave like a fluid and began to act like a solid. To the pilots who had touched its edges, it was known by a simpler, more terrifying name, the Demon. As an aircraft approached Mach 1, the air molecules in front of it could no longer get out of the way in time. They would stack, compress, and form a shock wave, a wall of immense pressure. This wave would slam back, striking the wings and, most critically, the control surfaces, the elevators, the rudders, the ailerons. They would suddenly become useless, as if frozen in concrete. The stick in the pilot's hand would either lock solid, or it would shake with such bone-jarring violence that it threatened to tear the wings from the fuselage. This was the sound barrier. It wasn't a barrier in the sense of a wall you could fly through. It was a wall that, according to many of the finest minds in aeronautics, would destroy any machine that tried, and it had already begun to claim its victims. His name was Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. He was British aviation royalty, the son of the legendary aircraft designer, and the chief test pilot for his father's company. He was handsome, brave, and arguably the most experienced high-speed pilot in the world. On September 27, 1946, he climbed into the cockpit of the most radical aircraft Britain had ever produced, the de Havilland DH-108, nicknamed the Swallow. The Swallow was a dagger built to probe the barrier. That evening, de Havilland took the aircraft up for a high-speed run over the Thames estuary, preparing for an attempt on the world speed record. He pushed the throttle, and the Swallow responded, accelerating past 600 miles per hour, climbing toward Mach 0.9. Then, silence. He vanished. Ground observers reported hearing a sharp crack, followed by a deeper explosion. It took days to find the wreckage, scattered across the mud flats of Egypt Bay. When de Havilland's body was finally recovered, investigators made a chilling discovery. His parachute harness was untouched. His neck was broken. The data, pieced together, told a horrifying story. As he approached the barrier, the DH-108 encountered the violent oscillations predicted by the engineers. The aircraft began to buck, a catastrophic longitudinal porpoising that slammed the pilot's head against the cockpit canopy with impossible force, breaking his neck before the plane itself disintegrated. The Demon had struck, and it had killed one of the best there was. Geoffrey de Havilland's death sent a shockwave through the aviation world. The British, stunned by the loss, pulled back. The sound barrier was no longer a theoretical problem. It was a killer. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, in the most desolate corner of California's Mojave Desert, the U.S. Army Air Forces had its own secret weapon. This was Muroc Army Airfield. Today, we know it as Edwards Air Force Base. But in 1947, it was the end of the world. A flat, cracked expanse of ancient lakebed, chosen for the simple reason that, if your experimental aircraft fell out of the sky, which it often did, you had 11 miles of perfectly flat, hard-packed earth to aim for. It was a place of isolation, of dust, devils, and searing heat. The pilots and engineers lived in crude wooden barracks. Their only social life revolved around a local, ramshackle bar called Pancho's Fly-In, run by a tough-as-nails former aviator named Pancho Barnes. This was not a place for the polished or the faint of heart. It was a place for men with, as they called it, the right stuff. And in this fraternity of the fearless, one man was already a legend. But he wasn't an engineer. He wasn't a scientist. He didn't have a prestigious degree from a fancy university. The man who would challenge the Demon was a product of the hard hills of West Virginia, born Charles Elwood Yeager in 1923. He grew up in the tiny, gas-lit town of Hamlin, where his father drilled for natural gas in the local fields. Young Chuck was an average student, more interested in hunting and fishing in the woods than in his textbooks. But he had something else, a gift, an innate, almost supernatural understanding of machinery. His father taught him to be self-reliant, and by his teenage years, Chuck could tear down and reassemble a Chevrolet engine with ease, feeling by hand when the timing was right. It was a physical connection to the mechanical world, a feel that couldn't be taught. When war broke out, he enlisted in the Army Air Forces, not to fly, but as a mechanic. His sharp eyes and steady hands made him a natural. But he was bored. He saw the pilots, the flying sergeants, and thought, I can do that. In 1942, he was accepted for pilot training. He was a natural. He was assigned to the 357th Fighter Group in England, flying the P-51 Mustang. He named his aircraft Glamorous Glenn, after his girlfriend, Glennis Dickhouse, who would soon be his wife. Yeager wasn't just good, he was exceptional. He had what pilots called situational awareness, an ability to see the entire three-dimensional battle in his mind. But his war, and his life, almost ended on just his 8th combat mission. On March 5, 1944, over occupied France, he was jumped by a flight of Focke-Wulf, 190 seconds. His Mustang was torn apart by cannon fire. Wounded, he was forced to bail out, parachuting into enemy territory. For a normal airman, the war was over. But Chuck Yeager was not a normal airman. He was found by the Mach, the French resistance. And he didn't just hide, he put his West Virginia skills to use. Drawing on his experience with his father's explosives in the gas fields, he taught the resistance fighters how to build and set fuses for bombs, becoming a valuable and incredibly dangerous asset. He and another evader eventually made a grueling, desperate trek across the snow-covered Pyrenees Mountains into neutral Spain, at one point coming under fire from a German patrol. He made it back to England. And then, he did the unthinkable. Army regulations were explicit. Any airman who had evaded capture with the help of the resistance was forbidden from flying over enemy territory again. If they were shot down a second time and captured, they could be tortured, compromising the secret networks that had saved them. Yeager refused to accept it. He wanted to fly. He wanted to fight. He protested, pushing his case all the way up the chain of command. Finally, in a now legendary encounter, Captain Chuck Yeager and another evadee, Captain Fred Glover, found themselves standing in front of the Supreme Allied Commander himself, General Dwight D. Eisenhower. Yeager, with his distinctive West Virginia drawl, made his case. He argued that the Allies were preparing for an invasion D-Day and would need every experienced fighter pilot they could get. Eisenhower, impressed by their sheer, stubborn audacity, consulted with his intelligence chiefs. He agreed. He made an exception. Yeager returned to his squadron with a vengeance. On October 12, 1944, he achieved the ultimate pilot's dream. He became an ace in a day, shooting down 5 German Mach 109 seconds on a single mission. He finished the war with 13 confirmed kills, including one of the first German Me-262 jet fighters, which he'd caught in its landing pattern, outsmarting a pilot in a technologically superior machine. When the war ended, Yeager was no longer just a mechanic from West Virginia. He was one of the hottest pilots in the new U.S. Army Air Forces. He was assigned to Wright Field in Ohio, the center of aeronautical research. He flew everything. He evaluated, captured German and Japanese fighters. He tested America's first jets, the P-80 and P-84. His skill was so obvious, his feel for an aircraft so profound, that he was selected for the most dangerous job of all, test pilot school. And in 1947, he was sent to the sun-scorched emptiness of Mach. A top-secret program was waiting for him. The project was designated the XS-1, Experimental Supersonic Model 1. It was the brainchild of a handful of brilliant minds at Bell Aircraft and the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, or NACA, the forerunner to NASA. In the wake of the war, they had studied captured German V-2 rocket data. They saw what the British were doing with the jet-powered DH-108, and they decided to take a completely different path. The problem, they reasoned, was power. A jet engine breathed air, and as it approached the sound barrier, that air became unstable, choking the engine. The solution? Get rid of the air-breathing engine. The X-1 would be a rocket. It was powered by a Reaction Motors XLR-11, a 4-chambered rocket engine that burned a volatile mix of liquid oxygen and ethyl alcohol. It was, in essence, a flying bomb. It was so dangerous and so fuel-hungry that it couldn't take off on its own. It had to be hauled to 30,000 feet by a B-29 mothership and then simply dropped. But the real genius of the X-1 was its shape. The engineers at Bell, looking for a design that was known to be stable at supersonic speeds, found their inspiration in a surprisingly simple object, a .50 caliber machine gun bullet. The X-1 was, quite literally, a bullet with wings, and it had one more secret. The British DH-108 had crashed because its control surfaces, its elevators, had frozen. The Bell engineers had devised a revolutionary solution. Instead of just having a small, hinged flap on the tail, the entire horizontal tail slab, the whole stabilizer, could be adjusted in flight, pivoting up and down. They theorized that this all-moving tailplane could maintain its authority, its bite on the air, even when the shockwave formed. It was a brilliant theory, but it was just a theory. Someone had to go up there and prove it. The project had originally been flown by Bell's own civilian pilot, Chalmers "Slick" Goodlin. Goodlin had completed the initial glide flights and a few powered flights, pushing the plane near the danger zone. But according to historical accounts, when it came time to push past the barrier, Goodlin demanded a massive bonus, $150,000. The Army Air Forces balked. The head of flight test, Colonel Albert Boyd, was furious. He decided his own military pilots would take the risk for flight pay. He assembled his team. The prime pilot would be 4-year-old Captain Chuck Yeager. The backup pilot and chase pilot in a P-80 would be his friend, Bob Hoover, a man many called the greatest stick and rudder pilot who ever lived. And the project engineer, the man who would translate the wind tunnel data into a flight plan, was Captain Jack Ridley. Ridley was the perfect foil for Yeager, a quiet, brilliant Oklahoman with a master's degree in aeronautical engineering. Yeager would land from a test flight and describe a vibration or a wobble with his hands, and Ridley would nod, go to his slide rule, and pinpoint the exact aerodynamic cause. "I trusted Jack with my life," Yeager would later say. He was the brains of the outfit. The team was set. Yeager, with a familiar sense of pride, had the aircraft painted a brilliant, unmissable orange, so it could be seen if it went down in the desert. And on the nose, he had a mechanic paint the same name he'd carried into combat, Glamorous Glennis. The stage was set. In the high desert, a small team of men was about to challenge the demon that had killed Geoffrey de Havilland. They had their man, a West Virginia warrior. They had their machine, an orange bullet full of rocket fuel. But no one, not Yeager, not Ridley, not the finest minds at NACA, truly knew what would happen. Would the all-moving tail save them? Or would Glamorous Glennis disintegrate in the sky, just another victim of the invisible wall? The first powered flights had begun, and with each one, Yeager was pushing the dial just a little bit further, closer to the edge.